Well, Esther, I'm really glad that you can join me today and we can have this conversation. And, I don't have a full hour left, but we'll see where it goes and we can always talk another time. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? I know a number of people are familiar with you because of your writing and some of your activity on Twitter and on Facebook. Why don't you let us know what you want to let us know about you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. This is a thrilling opportunity for me to be with the great Paul Vanderklay, also known as the pastor of the IDW. So,
I got a really, that's my congregation, boy. I sure got my work cut out for me.
oh, you sure do. So, okay, about me. So, I was raised in a Christian home by two wonderful parents who not only brought me up in the faith, but also encouraged me in critical thinking. The house was full of books. I was encouraged to read a lot from a very early age. And I always had a very philosophical turn of mind. And so we would often have conversations around the dinner table about faith and religion and culture and politics and all kinds of things. So I grew up observing culture very keenly and observing human nature very keenly. I always had a great love of literature and history. So the life of the mind, I would say, was cultivated very lovingly in my home. So faith and reason were kind of intertwined for me from the beginning. They were never seen as things that were separate. So I was homeschooled all the way. Yep, all the way up through high school, in fact. And
Wow.
yeah, so people often ask me, "Oh, what was that like?" And people are weird about homeschooling because they're not sure what it means, and they get connotations in their mind of who knows what. But for me, it meant stuff like learning Latin and reading Sir Walter Scott novels and watching Golden Age musicals and playing competitive chess and writing research papers about military history and listening to Handel and, neat stuff like that. I'm not sure what everyone else was doing at those ages, but that's what I was doing.
We
So,
we homeschooled our kids, and
oh yeah,
yeah,
fantastic.
and so for a while my wife was teaching in a public school, so I was homeschooling them during the day and kind of swing shifting a lot of my ministry. And I
Mm.
think it's a terrific way if it's a good fit between the parents and children. I've seen it not be a good fit, but when it's done well, it's really impressive.
Yeah, and I do want to be sensitive. I realize for some parents they just don't have that option because they need the money or because it's a single mom or that kind of circumstance. But if at all possible, I really think it's a good fit. And it's interesting because I'm part of a ladies who support Jordan Peterson group on Facebook, and I see a lot of moms in that group who one thing they appreciate about Peterson is that he talks often and vocally about indoctrination in public schools.
Yeah.
And they say, man, he's so right, and my kids are learning all this crap. Hey, ladies, any good book recommendations for things I can give to my kids when they come home? And I always go, you could always homeschool. It's like just something to think about. But so that kind of leads into one big reason why I was attracted early on to Peterson is because he comes from the university. And I care a lot about the academy and the university. I'm a grad student right now. I'm a grad student in mathematics, in fact. And I picked mathematics because it was a very safe discipline. So even though humanities and literature and all those things are really, I would consider my first love, I made this sort of hard left into STEM because I knew that I would be safe. I knew that I wouldn't have to salute the flag of postmodernist nonsense and speak words that I didn't mean, because nobody gets offended if you're arguing over a mathematical theorem or proof or something. They're all just, very sensible, level-headed folks, except math ed. I have had a couple. I have had a couple of run-ins with math ed people, but that's another story. Anything that ends with the word education, I just.
Oh, okay.
But
how did you get in on Jordan Peterson? I mean, when did you discover him? Why did he grab your interest? And he's obviously he obviously has grabbed your interest because a lot of the writing that you've been doing has been about him.
Yeah, so I actually came late to the party. I first discovered him through the Newman interview in pretty soon after it aired in February. People were sharing it all over, and so never heard of the guy before, had never heard of the Bill C-16 stuff. And so I watched that, and that was a lot of fun. And so then, that was my first low-resolution snapshot of Peterson. And then I think the second thing of his that I saw was his discussion with William Lane Craig and Rebecca Goldstein, because I knew William Lane Craig pretty well. He was better known in the kinds of circles where I run. And so I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And I thought Craig won the argument, but I was really intrigued with some of the things that Peterson was saying as well. I thought he was kind of, looking around for the answers that he needed to ground some of his really good ideas, but he wasn't quite sure where to put them all. And I was especially struck when he was talking about pain and suffering in that conversation. He says, well, suppose you have a sick child. There's great meaning in being present with your sick child in his suffering. And so, and if you don't think that's meaningful because, oh, well, in a billion years, what difference will it make? Then, man, there's something wrong with your soul, Yeah. And I thought, well, that's got to find out more about it. And then actually I was scrolling down in the comments and someone said, oh man, he must have been thinking about his daughter. And I was like, oh, his daughter? Oh, what's that all about? So I go searching some more. And then I found a little clip from a longer lecture introducing the book where he was talking about Michaela's illness. And he was talking about the last rule, petting a cat, and looking for the gleaming bit of crystal in the middle of life's darkest times. And man, that sold me. That really got me choked up. And then one or two other key clips. There's the one Jordan Peterson's finest moment clip that's actually a good friend of mine posted that, and it went viral. And I think that's the one where at the end he goes, well, so that's it. And, people burst out in applause. And so that I hit on several really good short clips early on that gave me a look at all facets of Peterson, I think.
Okay.
And so then from then on, I was like, okay, I got to read the book. I got to find out his lectures. And then I'm still here. I'm still kind of analyzing.
Yeah. Why now you're, in terms of the Peterson blogosphere, you have very solid evangelical credentials, and you're a very, you called
me a hardcore evangelical apologist at one point. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. Sure.
That's kind of how I see you posturing yourself. Now there are a lot of evangelicals who they might, conservative evangelicals, instead of, let's differentiate them from, let's call the progressive evangelicals, that has been this wave over the last 10 years or so that have been moving in a different direction. You're definitely not part of that camp.
No.
But even a lot of the progressive evangelicals, they're kind of on the left with, they get Petersonian rash. I mean, they read the New York Times, and so they're not going to pay any attention to him. He gets better treatment amongst conservative evangelicals, partly because he is rightly or wrongly read to be, perhaps more in a line with some of their social values, but I don't see you engaging that aspect of him as much. So what about him has kept your imagination, has kept your interest? What's your motivation here, Esther?
What's my motivation? What's my angle? Come on.
What's your angle?
I think my angle is that I'm a student of human nature.
Okay.
And Jordan Peterson is a student of human nature.
Okay.
And so I think I look at him and I see a kindred spirit in many ways. And I see an honest guy who's really wrestling with the deepest possible questions of life, and doing so in a completely forthright way. And I would also say that I also am concerned about the encroachment of postmodernism and liberalism at the universities. And so I share a lot of the same sort of culture war type fears that Peterson has. And so in some of those respects, I don't think conservative evangelicals are wrong to see a kind of ally. So, for example, I think he would be very friendly to the conservative baker who doesn't want to bake a gay wedding cake, for instance. So I see people like Nancy Pearcey, for example, who's an evangelical culture watcher. She's been retweeting Peterson quite a bit and following him. And so, but I think you're right that he is a classical liberal as opposed to a true blue conservative. And so when it comes to issues like abortion, for example, he's really not going to have much to say. And in fact, he kind of really doesn't talk about that much at all. And the one time he was asked, he sort of fudged it. And gay marriage, he's sort of like, well, maybe, maybe not. So in that sense, I see what you mean, that he's not strictly aligned along the same lines. And so I think I'm of one mind with him, though, in fact, on all the cultural things. And so it's not that I disagree with that, but I think my primary interest in him is him as a humanist, and a lover of mankind, and somebody who's reaching, well, I would say he's reaching for God. That really fascinates me. That's really captured me. And the way that he deals with suffering, I would say, is a part of all that, and is a big thing that has really moved me deeply. And just to see how much he loves people, and listening to his stories of patients that he's worked with, is just often very heartbreaking, but also humanizing, I think, and necessary. It's good for people to feed on. And so C.S. Lewis talks about creating men with chests in The Abolition of Man.
Right. And
I think we needed, in our culture, we needed somebody like Peterson to come along and create men with chests. We were really starved for that kind of a teacher.
Yeah. No, I think that's I've been obviously doing my series on the abolition of man.
I know, it's good stuff.
But I think that's very much the role that Peterson has played, because he is a man with a chest. He doesn't just, his head doesn't look so big because his chest is so small, which is obviously what Lewis sees. No, Peterson, part of what I think people connected with Peterson was that I agree with you in that I don't think he's duplicitous any more than any of us are. We're all duplicitous to one degree, but he isn't being duplicitous. I think we are getting the genuine article when he's out there speaking his mind. He's got his heart on his sleeve. Maybe he should have a Twitter governor, but because I
think that would be Julian.
Yeah, he could probably use a Twitter governor, but so you're able to live with the live as if, and the associations with Jung, and the intense embrace of Charles Darwin. You're able to still hang with Peterson.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reading critically and thinking critically since I was a little kid. So, to counter someone with different ideas from me is just, I mean, it's no problem. He's an interesting person. I just engage him that way. And so I don't just sort of break into hives because he has a different paradigm than I do.
Part of what the conservative evangelical Peterson fan base continues to long for is the closing of the deal on Jordan Peterson. Now, I don't know if he was baptized early on in the Church of Canada or not, because if he was, then, when he joins the Christian Reformed Church, we wouldn't baptize him again.
Well, it's interesting because there was this new interview with a guy named Patrick Bet-David. It was a really fun interview. The guy really tried to go some new places with Peterson, and they taught some about Peterson's upbringing. And the guy asked him, "So was your family like a really religious family? Like, did you talk a lot about religion, politics, and stuff?" And Peterson was like, "No, not at all." Which is interesting because he talks about going to church as a kid. And so, well, I think that tells you all you need to know about the United Church of Canada. I mean, yeah, I got opinions.
You do? You have opinions?
I know, shocking.
I'm shocked, Esther. I'm just shocked. But, so it's, part of the fun of the movement has been we could do a little wheel of fortune, and, the whole Jordan Peterson thing in some ways is like a giant Truman Show, and we're watching him, and we want to know, how will it end? What will become of Jordan? Will he be wasted on daytime television as the new Dr.
Oh, dear God, no.
Will he go on daytime television only to be hauled off like Megyn Kelly? Will he
Will he announce on Twitter that he's converted to Eastern Orthodoxy as of tomorrow, or what?
Yeah, well, if he, here's the thing, though. The Eastern Orthodox Church, some evangelical church might roll out the red carpet to Jordan Peterson if he makes the right noises, but the Orthodox are going to be, not so fast, Jordan.
Well, this is the funny thing. The evangelical response, as I've seen it, and a good friend of mine observed this, and I think he's right, it seems to kind of split into either the evangelicals who are a little too fond of Jordan Peterson, so they're like, oh, the man is a Christian. He should be preaching in our pulpits on a Sunday morning. As far as I'm concerned, he's going to heaven already. It's like the Babylon Bee article about appointing Peterson an honorary Christian. He's like, stop saying that, man. You're putting words in my mouth. I didn't say that,
I'm not.
Yeah, right. So there's that kind of evangelical Christian response, and then there's this man is not of God. He's talking about Jung and Darwin. I think we should shun him. We should avoid. Joe Carter wrote this really disappointing piece for the Gospel Coalition where he was saying that Peterson was dangerous. I think he said. And I'm like,
I hadn't read that one.
Yeah, it's an old one. It was back in the summer. I'll send it to you. But okay. I was frustrated by that because I'm thinking, dude, kids are listening to who's out there in the culture, and you would far rather they were listening to Jordan Peterson than a lot of the other people out there. Now,
and Rob Bell?
Yes, actually, I would say, because at least Peterson doesn't pretend to be a Christian. Oh wait, although Bell isn't pretending to be a Christian anymore either, though, come to think of it. Yeah, Bell did finally drop the act, so thank God for that.
Maybe when Jordan finally Oprah, when Jordan finally appears on the Oprah Winfrey Network.
Oh God, no.
Rob Bell.
Oh no. But here's the thing with Jordan, and we can get into a little bit of my writing on this. I think he can be a little unnecessarily prickly when people ask him, do you believe in God, or do you believe in the resurrection? And he'll go, oh, well, that's how dare you ask me that? That's an incredibly private, personal question. And on the one hand, I understand that, but on the other hand, I want to say, dude, you're making hours-long lectures about the Bible and God and life, the universe, and everything. Cookie for everyone who caught that. But suddenly someone asks, oh, hey, so by the way, do you think there's a God out there? What kind of a question is that? It's like,
yeah.
It's a little bit, and I think too that he assumes that the people asking, his guard always goes up when people ask that question because he assumes they're asking it with an agenda.
They are. There's a huge agenda.
Well, but I'm going somewhere with this. So it could be an agenda, and certainly many atheists would ask it as a way of testing him, sort of the way that Harris will mock him by saying, oh, come on. So do you believe in the resurrection? Here, basic modernist test number 1. Did Jesus rise from the dead? So there's the atheist agenda. And then there could be, a Christian who was suspicious of him, who was ready to sort of shoo him out as soon as he gave a definitive no answer. But I think
probably not.
Well, yeah, I think there's a large contingent of Christians, though, who would sincerely like to know his answer, not so that they can either claim him for their team or boot him out of the club, but just because they're sincerely interested in the guy and, a little concerned for his soul, maybe. And so they're just like, man, I mean, I really love this guy. I'd love for him to encounter Christ, you know, and man, wouldn't it be great if he finally understood, you know? It's sort of like there's this line in The Last Battle where the Calorman warrior Emeth is introduced, and he's, you know, very much from the opposite team, and so they see him walking across the grass, and Jewel the unicorn, a talking unicorn for those who haven't read the story, he
the best kind.
the best kind, exactly. He whispers to the main character, because this young guy Emeth just looks very sort of noble and forthright and honest. He just has this kind of look about him, and the unicorn whispers, "By the lion's mane." That's sort of their expression in Narnia. "By the lion's mane, I almost love this young warrior. He is worthy of a better god than Tash." And Tash is the false god of the coward meets. And so I think a lot of people, Christians, feel that way with Peterson. They're like, he's worthy of a better god than Jung, you know?
There's gonna be some comments on that, boy.
Yeah, but it's a very earnest. It comes from a very earnest and passionate place, I think, for many of us, is we want him to meet the Christ, because we think that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And Peterson is fumbling for the key at the door, or he's fumbling for the handle, whatever analogy you want to use. And we just want him to walk through the door for his sake, you know, not because we want to kind of milk him for something or get something out of it.
Well, how do we know he hasn't, or how would we know when he would? Would he? Because I think when he gives his answer about belief, I think that is his answer. He's been given that answer for a long time. I'm not saying it won't change, but tell me why it's insufficient.
Because I think you've been beginning to unpack a lot of this. I think one reason is that he still, I think, stands in a ultimately hopeless place, because he doesn't have the hope of the resurrection. And this is, in my latest piece, I wrote this for Unbelievable, and it's called "What's Stopping Jordan Peterson from Rejecting Jesus' Resurrection?" And it's about how he's not willing to leave it in the realm of the merely metaphorical. And I think the reason why he leaves that door open a crack is because he senses, like he said in the Tim Lott clip, I refuse to rule out the possibility of life after death, of a final victory of good over evil, of judgment, and all those things. And so I think he lacks the hope that's found in Christ, in Christ's bodily resurrection, in the resurrection hope. And I also think that he lacks a mechanism for atonement. Because it was interesting, I found an old clip from a Q&A where someone was asking him, what about guilty secrets? So say I cheat on my wife once, and I vow never to do it again. Should I take that to the grave, or what should I do? And how do I forgive myself? And Peterson said, well, in some sense, you never forgive yourself, right? You're never forgiven. And I thought, yeah, I think that right there is another big thing that is unmet, I think, by his model and by his project. And so, Peterson himself will say that he has a great capacity for evil, and that he is always seeing himself as the Nazi prison guard. So there are bad things that he's done in his life, even though overall I wouldn't shy from saying he's a good guy. Now, some Calvinists might say, no man is good but God. They'd wrap me on the knuckles for that. And I know you're not one of those Calvinists.
Throwing Calvinist shade.
Ha! Not you, though. You're good. You're cool, man. You're cool. But, oh, dude, I got some hardcore Calvinist friends who'd be like, no man is good. And I'm like, shut up. Peterson's a good guy. I think we could all agree on that. This is a solid dude. But he's, like all of us, a good guy who's done bad stuff. And so he has to recognize that Jesus is more than the archetype, more than the perfect man, more than the exemplar of the suffering individual. Christ is the atoner. Christ is the one who bears the sins of the world on his shoulders, because it's something that we cannot pay for ourselves. So that's how the guy who was asking Peterson that question, that's the answer that guy needs. It's not something Peterson can give currently.
It's Christ actually carries us up the hill.
Exactly.
Us, the cross, the weight of the world, he takes the whole thing.
Although, I kind of like that analogy, but I am an Arminian, so so here's the thing though. I don't get, how can you be such a huge Lewis fan? And C.S. Lewis was so Arminian. I mean, The Great Divorce, that's such an Arminian book, man. And here you are, this hardcore Calvinist, recommending it. I'm like, well, I like The Great Divorce. I'm not sure why you like The Great
Divorce. Lewis is tricky with this stuff, though. And I think he understood the complexities of the question of, because the question is really about agency and figuring out God's agency and our agency and how those two work. What Lewis says about that in Mere Christianity is also very interesting. So
well, I think if Peterson did embrace Christianity, I would imagine he would embrace a pretty Arminian form thereof, because he's so strong on free will and on the action of the individual and individual choices. There's a famous quote in T.S. Eliot's poem Little Gidding. How does this go? Every step that we take is a step to the block, or down the sea's throat, or to an illegible stone, and that is where we start. It's so that every single choice we make is fraught with significance. So that was one of the very first things that struck me about Peterson, is when he said, everything you do matters. Every single thing you do matters. And so,
well, Calvinists don't disagree with that.
Okay, well, that's good, but I'm just not exactly sure how to make that meaningful. We
won't try to fix.
We won't try it. We're not going to do that.
Controversy
here.
In
25 minutes for sure. But
where do you want to go with your writing with Peterson? What are you thinking about?
What am I thinking about with Peterson? Well, I might have a book on. So I kind of have. It's like all the hot takes nobody wanted at the time. But I'm sort of shaping something, and it'll probably use some pre-existing material. So some of what I wrote in my debate analysis, some of what I wrote in this new piece for Primary Christian Radio. And so I think if I gave it a title, it would be something a little bit dramatic. I don't know. Maybe I like 5 minutes to midnight. And actually, that phrase came from that semi-hit piece that his former colleague did, where he was talking about this dream that Peterson's wife had, and that she said she dreamed it was 5 minutes to midnight, which of course has all kinds of connotations. And that the subtitle would be, I don't know, What I Saw at the Jordan Peterson Revolution, sort of a Peggy Noonan type callback, because she had a famous book about Ronald Reagan called What I Saw at the Revolution. So I could sort of be the Peggy Noonan to Peterson's Reagan, I guess. That might be fun.
Interesting.
Yeah. Oh, now you're thinking about all the.
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember Reagan, so.
Sure, yeah. Well, my folks came of age in the Reagan era, and so I was very much raised in a sort of Reagan conservative tradition. I read Thomas Sowell for civics in high school, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, one thing I would like to still write, and I might send this to the Public Discourse, it's a Catholic online publication, is I want to write something about Jordan Peterson and the culture of death, because I talked with this young guy that Peterson talked out of suicide back in the summer, pretty famously. Now the recording's all over YouTube, and a lot of people really connected with that story. And when I listened to that recording, I was just so struck by the arguments that Peterson was giving against suicide. And where he was not only saying, well, your family would miss you, that sort of thing. He was saying it's actually wrong to kill yourself.
Yeah.
And I thought that is so interesting, because here's a guy who, is not a Christian. Nobody can accuse him of being a fundagelical, Bible thumping, whatever, like, oh, you're just saying that because the Bible says so. It's like, no, he's actually saying, no, it's actually objectively wrong to kill yourself. And that's a controversial thing to say in today's cultural milieu.
Yeah.
So, I would say, dude, there's so much, like, the Catholic natural law theorists are nodding their heads like, yep, that's the way to go. And I also found an old debate that he did with a guy named David Benatar, who's the antinatalist guy. And so Peterson took the pro-natal position.
Yeah.
So that's Peterson. He's pro-natal. He once said, I'm pro-people, man. You know.
Yeah.
And even though he sort of shies from the pro-life issue in, like, specifically as pertains to abortion, I would say that his ethic is very pro-life in a broad sense. And so in that sense, I think that he's an ally against the sort of dehumanizing effect that the culture of death has had. And I think Douglas Murray is another interesting writer in this respect as well. I think he also sees the onset of euthanasia. He was saying in this recent Rebel Wisdom interview that he's sort of obsessed by the question of sanctity of life because he sees it slipping at the margins, was his phrase, is slipping at the edges. And so I think that's something that haunts Peterson and Murray, and Eric Weinstein as well. I would kind of throw in this category. I think these are guys who are sort of haunted by what the Darwinian paradigm would mean if they followed it all the way out to its perfectly logical, rational conclusions. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to go there. And so that's why in Peterson's case, this takes the form of two kinds of truth. Sort of two stories, as Francis Schaeffer might put it, like, well, okay, so you got your literal, empirical, scientific facts over here. But then you've got metaphorical and literary truths over there. And those are the truths that actually govern us. And those are the things that are more true than the literal in some sense. And so he feels like he has to do that, because otherwise, if he just stays in the lower story and uses machine logic to work out what a Darwinist way of looking at things would actually mean if you cashed it out, it doesn't lead anywhere good. So he says, well, we need to sort of escape to the higher ground of metaphorical truth, and that's where we can be humane, and buck off our programming, so to speak. And so then what I would like to come along and say as a Christian is, well, there's actually only one truth. And it brings together all the different facets. It brings together stories, but it also brings that together with science and with history and with instinct, intuition, and all these things actually converge. But I don't know if Peterson will ever get to that place as long as he's wedded to the Jungian paradigm and the Darwinian paradigm.
How do you think Jung jeopardizes that journey for Peterson?
I think Jung jeopardizes the journey because Jung just sort of throws the Christian story. Well, if I could put it this way, here's a nice sort of pithy way to put it. Jung sees history as the story of man's search for God, whereas the Christian sees history as the story of God's search for man. So in Jung's framework, the idea, this thing we call God, quote unquote, is kind of thrown up from the collective unconscious. Just like morality is sort of thrown up over this evolutionary process where you bring in Jean Piaget and the game playing and iterative games and imitation and that sort of thing. These are man-made creations. God is an idea in the mind of man. And so then Christianity is just one more little branch or one more little manifestation of of the God thought, the God idea. And so, but what's missing in all of this is your God number two, which is the God who's actually outside time and space.
Right. The actor.
Yeah, exactly. The actor. And so that's why Peterson also has, just like you say, he has a bottom-up view. He has a bottom-up view of Jesus, at Jesus' resurrection. And so he goes, well, I mean, I guess maybe if you were just like a Superman who got the balance between life and death just right, you could be like one of those Easter gurus who says, yes, bury me in the ground for 3 days and I shall something, I shall be one with the oneness, or, like what have you. But he's still thinking of all this in bottom-up terms. He still hasn't made the connection with, no, Christ, this actually is an invasion from outer space, if you will. They're not literally outer space, but this really is God stepping down into the story from outside time and space.
So where's Peterson? So what's your take on, so we've had this lull with Peterson, and he's flirting with daytime television, and he's still running.
That was actually not a bad interview, though. I mean, Dr. Oz actually.
A great interview.
Yeah, that's so funny about it. Yeah.
It was, I thought, the best packaging of Peterson for a daytime popular audience.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of hardcore Petersonian nerds just kind of, clutched their heart thinking, oh, will he be, Owen Benjamin certainly went off the deep end. But,
it's a nutcase, man.
We'll have to see what Node has to say about that. Node loves Owen.
I mean, he's got a big heart, but man, he's gotten mixed up with all the wrong people. Anyway, go on. So he's still doing his evangelistic crusade, disguised as a book tour, all over the world. But that'll come to an end, and then he says he'll get back into the study. First of all, will he ever go back into the classroom? Can he ever go back into the classroom? I don't think he will. I think he wants to. I think he wants to leave, which I'm a little saddened by that personally. And here talk about this online university and how it'll be very student-driven. He talked a little bit in this one Q&A, I could send it to you, but how students will be sort of taking tests and competing, and then they'll be able to network with each other and compare ideas and stuff. And then he said something about outsourcing the teaching of writing, because I know he's passionate about teaching people to write, but that's very time-consuming and can't really be well done in an online format. So what seems like might be lost in this online system that he's envisaging is the sort of hands-on teacher-student relationship, which it's just irreplaceable. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what bricks and mortar offers that the online university doesn't offer. So I, as a teacher, because I've taught as a grad student, I love that about Peterson. I see him as a teacher, and there's something sad about the fact that he'll never be in a classroom with just 35 people in it again. That people won't be able to get that close to him again, physically and metaphorically.
Some of my favorite stuff are, his classroom lectures.
Me too, mine too. Yeah.
He is
just sitting on the desk.
Yeah.
Great truths. Yeah. So, but I don't think he will. I do think, though, I'm not sure that I would advise it that way, but for a variety of reasons. Not just for those kinds of reasons, but also I don't know how long this bubble is going to last. Yeah. I mean, he's writing this sequel. I'm thinking, man, we didn't need a sequel. I was really cool with this first one. It's really fine, but there's multiple factors at work here. I'm sure his publishers have been on him. You got to write a sequel. Okay, I'll write a sequel. And so, I mean, frankly, I don't want him to write more stuff. I wanted to read more stuff. I wanted to go back and read N.T. Wright. I wanted to think about the resurrection. I want him to think about faith and works. All this. I wanted to have conversations with intelligent Christians, which he doesn't seem to have too many of in his life right now. I mean, he's got Jonathan Peugeot. He's got like one Catholic friend, and I'm not thinking of too many more that he's mentioned anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't need him to make more content. I want him to think more, because there's so much that he still has to learn, as he will say himself, and that's something I admire hugely. I guess I'll mention here, when I did have a chance to meet him at an event, And I got a question in, which was fantastic. And it was probably a bit long, but I really kind of wanted to pack a punch. And so I essentially laid out for him, I asked him, how much hope do you think we can extract from a purely metaphorical read of the Christian narrative, as opposed to it being literally true? Because it seems like all the stuff I was outlining earlier, you lose that literal resurrection, restoration,
Right.
judgment, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I mean, he basically said a similar answer. Some of it was quite similar to what he said to Patrick Coffin about the literal, the metaphorical can touch. So yeah, I'm like, if that's how he wants to think about it, sure. I'm not sure if that's how I would phrase it, but whatever helps him think this through. But that basically he doesn't understand it. And he said, the reason I bracket it is because I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. And I want to stay in my lane because I'm a psychologist. So that's what I know. But he said that he keeps saying that he would like to know more. And man, I respect that so much. I respect a guy who knows what he does not know. Plato, of course, talks about that, And so I know Christians who are really rigid as far as, well, if you get hit by a bus and you haven't said a prayer and accepted Jesus as your personal savior, well, you're going straight to hell, which is really, really awful soteriology. I mean,
I'm a Calvinist. God picks his friends.
Haha. Well, yeah, and so a lot of people think that death is like it, man. It's like no more chances after that. But in my
whoa, this is the big lead. Let's hear Esther O'Reilly allow a little C.S. Lewis purgatory.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would call it purgatory exactly, but I would say it's the Emeth play. Going back to Emeth now, this is the young Cowerman who deserves a better God than Tash. Emeth is a guy who wants the good. He wants the truth, and he's thought that was Tash all his life. But when he meets Aslan, he immediately realizes he's made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
And so the first thing he does when he sees Aslan is to fall on his face and worship. And so then that's when we get this very passage, which is quite controversial in some circles, but where Aslan is saying, I received your worship myself. And so I think Peterson is in that position because he's a guy who he's always talking about the good and, oh, my little natural law heart is warmed, every time he talks about the good. So he wants that. And even though he isn't connecting everything up together, he knows what he doesn't know. He knows there's something significant about the resurrection. And so I think he's the kind of guy who, if he met Jesus, would want Jesus. And of course, all of us are going to meet Jesus after we die. And so I would definitely not say, even though Peterson hasn't, prayed the little prayer, and even though I do think it's important that he come to accept Christ in this life, I don't rule out that once he does encounter Christ, even if he died before he figured all this stuff out, it could be entirely possible that he would meet Jesus and go, oh, now I get it. Okay, now it makes sense, and I leave that in God's hands. Whereas on the flip side, there are a lot of people who would, say that they have all the right beliefs, but I look at them and I go, I'm not sure that person's right with God, man. The way he's acting, I'm not, and that goes back to what you do, right, versus what you say. So
my head is flooding with titles for this video, Esther.
Yeah.
They'll never let you on Unbelievable again. They'll have you on the other side of the table.
I don't know about that. I think, and speaking of Unbelievable, here's something that might or might not happen, but listeners could be on the lookout just in case. We just now sent via David Fuller from Rebel Wisdom. Justin and I have formally extended an invitation to Douglas Murray. Because Douglas and I have a lot in common. He's my favorite atheist at the moment. And we both have Church of England backgrounds, and so we could speak the same language in that respect. And so Justin is really keen to have me and Douglas clash swords in a friendly manner on Unbelievable at some future point. So that is a bit of a long shot. But could happen. It might
Oh,
happen. We'll
that'd
see.
be fun. That'd
Yeah.
be fun. Well, we just got a few more minutes. Any last takes or any last things you want to get in before we have to land this plane? Any questions for me?
Do I have any questions for you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess one question I might have is if you could interview Peterson again, what would you want to ask him now that you didn't get to ask him before?
Part of the challenge of those kind of talks are you asking questions because you want information, or are you trying to look for little cracks to be a lying pastor? So I was really thankful for Josh, who gave me his Patreon slot, and I enjoyed my conversation with him. I too, we all have our hopes for other people, which is always a little slimy.
Well, I mean, I have my own ideas. If if I had gotten the opportunity that you did, I think one thing that I would say, and this is what I would say to Murray as well. It's what I would say to a number of these guys, but what I would say to Peterson is just like I would tell the man who is a Jew that if he becomes a Christian, he will be more fully Jewish than ever before. So I would tell the man who is a humanist, which Peterson is, I think, a true humanist of the old breed, not the Peter Singer kind of humanist. The humanist who becomes a Christian is more fully humanist than ever before. And so I think in Christianity, Peterson could find the fulfillment of his humanism because he's a lover of mankind. He believes that there's something unique about man. There's something special about man. And so in Christ and in Christianity, that's where Imago Dei is grounded. Yeah. That's where sanctity of life is grounded. Okay. And so that's something that I would love for him to see and to come to realize it. So I really hope he keeps following his intuitions there, because he knows that it would take him past Darwin, but I think he's maybe a little afraid to go past Darwin because Darwin and Jung are like these two pillars holding up his model. And that was something else he said in his interview with Bette David, and maybe this will be a good way to wrap it up, but Patrick asked him if he had a photographic memory. And Peterson said, no, that's not how I remember stuff. The way I remember information is when I get a new bit of information, I find the place in my theory where it fits in. Yeah. Yeah. And I say, that goes there. But what I would want to challenge Peterson with is, what if you got a new piece of information that shattered your theory? What would you do with that? And maybe it wouldn't shatter all of your theory. I think some of Peterson's project would be better grounded and more fulfilled than ever before by Christianity, but it would involve the burning away of some dead wood from the rest of his project in order for that to happen. Yeah. So I'd be really intrigued to get his answer to that question.
Yeah, that'd be good. Well, thank you, Esther. This was was a joy, and keep writing, and I'll keep reading your work. And it's always fun to see you've got a real gift, and I love how you approach these questions and how you set them up for us to look at them in a fresh way. That's a real gift. You do your homeschooling parents proud.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad at the doors that this has opened up, and it's been a great ride. I know it'll end eventually. Maybe like Peterson's ride will end eventually, but I'm enjoying it while it lasts, and I'm really happy to have had this opportunity here with you. So thank you for that.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to end the recording now and just keep you for a minute before my next talk.
All right.